single mom helped a homeless man, not knowing he was a billionaire. The dashboard clock glowed 9:47 p.m. in faint green numbers, barely illuminating the cramped interior of the 2008 Honda Civic. Susan Mitchell sat in the Pizza Palace parking lot, counting the same bills for the third time, as if her desperation might somehow multiply the total. $23.47. Between her calloused fingers, still smelling of pepperoni and grease, the crumpled money represented more than just a night's work. It was a choice, medicine or miracles, survival or sacrifice. The math was simple and brutal. Her phone buzzed against the passenger seat. "Mommy, when are you coming home?" Lily's 5-year-old voice was thick with sleep. Susan's exhausted face transformed instantly, the way only a mother's can. "Soon, baby. Did you eat the chicken nuggets Mrs. Patterson made?" "Yes, but I saved you 3. They're in the microwave. You didn't eat lunch again." The observation hit Susan harder than it should. Her daughter was 5 years old and already keeping track of whether her mother was eating, already carrying worry no child should carry. "Mrs. Patterson is still there with you, right? She's watching her shows." "Mommy, my tummy hurts a little." Susan's grip tightened on the money. The prescription waiting at the pharmacy cost $32. With the 18 she'd saved from last week and tonight's 23, she'd have just enough. Enough for medicine and maybe something small for Lily's birthday next week. "I'll bring your medicine tonight, okay? Be good for Mrs. Patterson. Mommy loves you to the moon. And back again," Lily whispered. "Times infinity." The call ended. Susan sat in the silence, staring at the money that suddenly felt impossibly heavy in her hands. Through the fogging windshield, she watched the Pizza Palace's neon sign flicker, red and yellow light dancing across wet pavement. That's when she saw him. The homeless man sat against the brick wall just beyond the parking lot, wrapped in layers of filthy clothes, hands covered in torn plastic bags, his presence invisible to the stream of customers walking past. A couple emerged from the restaurant, the woman clutching a pizza box, the smell of fresh-baked crust cutting through the cold November air. The homeless man lifted his head, hope flickering in his weathered face. "Excuse me, could you spare? Get a job." The man in the expensive coat muttered without breaking stride. His companion laughed, the sound sharp as broken glass. The homeless man's shoulders collapsed inward, hope extinguished as quickly as it had appeared. Susan looked down at her $23.47, then at the empty pharmacy bag on her passenger seat, waiting to be filled with medicine her daughter needed. Her grandmother's voice echoed across the years, from before the rejection, before Susan's world fell apart. A voice that used to read scripture at the kitchen table while they snapped green beans on the back porch. "Whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me." Susan took one long breath, tucked the money into her coat pocket, and opened the car door into the cold night air. She had absolutely no idea that this choice, this impossible $23 choice made in a dark parking lot on an ordinary Tuesday, would change everything. Not just for her, for everyone. Welcome back to another incredibly heartwarming story, my dear family and friends. Before we proceed, could you please hit that subscribe button so we can continue bringing you these great stories? Thank you. To understand why Susan Mitchell would give away money she desperately needed to a complete stranger, you have to go back 6 years, to a small town in Georgia where church bells rang every Sunday morning and everybody knew everybody's business. Susan grew up in Dawsonville, population 3,400, where her father was a deacon and her mother led the women's ministry. The Hendersons were the kind of family that sat in the third pew every service, the kind that brought casseroles to potlucks and never missed Wednesday night Bible study. Susan had been raised on scripture and sweet tea, taught that modesty was virtue and obedience was love. She had been a good daughter, honor roll student, volunteered at the church nursery, planned to attend a local Christian college and maybe become a teacher, marry a nice boy from a good family, live the life that had been carefully mapped out for her since birth. Then she met Marcus Webb at 25. He was 32, charming in a way that felt dangerous and exciting, a sales manager passing through town for work. He had a smile that made promises and eyes that made her forget every warning her mother had ever given her. For 3 months, Susan lived a secret life, meeting Marcus at a hotel 2 towns over, lying to her parents about working late shifts at the diner. She told herself it was love. She told herself he'd marry her eventually. She told herself that the guilt crushing her chest during Sunday services would be worth it once they built a life together. The pregnancy test came back positive on a Thursday morning in March. Susan remembered every detail of that day. The pink lines appearing in the little window, her hands shaking so hard she dropped the test in the sink. The way the bathroom floor felt cold against her knees as she sat there, trying to breathe, trying to think, trying to pray. She told Marcus first, called him from her car in the diner parking lot during her break, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm pregnant. It's yours. We need to talk about what we're going to do." The silence on the other end lasted exactly 7 seconds. "You're sure it's mine?" Those 5 words shattered something in Susan's chest. "Of course it's yours. Marcus, I haven't been with anyone else. You know that. Look, Susan, I like you, but I'm not ready for this. I have a career, responsibilities. You need to handle this. I'll send you some money to take care of it." "Take care of it? Marcus, this is a baby. Our baby." "No." His voice turned cold, clinical. "It's a situation. And I'm telling you right now, if you keep it, you're on your own. Don't call me again." The line went dead. Susan sat in that parking lot for 40 minutes, watching people come and go from the diner, living their normal lives while hers crumbled. She couldn't get an abortion. Her faith wouldn't allow it, even as shattered as that faith felt in that moment, which meant she had to tell her parents. She waited until after dinner that night. Her father was reading the newspaper in his recliner. Her mother was washing dishes, humming a hymn. The kitchen smelled like pot roast and disappointment waiting to happen. "Mama, Daddy, I need to tell you something." The look on her mother's face when Susan said the words, "I'm pregnant," was something that would haunt her forever. Not anger, not initially, just shock, like Susan had spoken in a foreign language. Her father's newspaper slowly lowered, his face turning red, then purple. "Who's the father?" her mother whispered. "His name is Marcus. He doesn't want to be involved." "Where did we go wrong?" Her father's voice shook. "How could you disgrace this family like this? Disgrace yourself? Disgrace God? Daddy, I made a mistake, but I can't undo it now. I need your help. You need to get out of this house." Susan's mother gasped. "Richard." "No, Patricia. She made her choice. She chose sin. She chose to lie to us, to sneak around, to dishonor everything we taught her. There are consequences for sin. I'm your daughter," Susan heard herself say, tears streaming down her face. "My daughter wouldn't do this. My daughter knows better. You have until tomorrow morning to pack your things and leave. I won't have this wickedness under my roof." Susan turned to her mother, desperate. But her mother just stood there, dish towel clutched in her hands, silent tears on her cheeks, saying nothing. The silence was worse than her father's rage. That night, Susan packed everything she owned into 4 garbage bags and loaded them into her Honda Civic. She had $847 in her savings account and nowhere to go. She slept in a Walmart parking lot that first night, crying so hard she threw up twice. For the next 6 months, Susan lived in her car, parking in different locations every night to avoid trouble. She worked double shifts at the diner until her pregnancy started showing and they reduced her hours. She showered at a truck stop for $3. She ate one meal a day, usually a kid's meal from a fast food drive-thru, drinking water from gas station bathrooms. The pregnancy was hard. Morning sickness that lasted all day. Back pain that made every delivery shift agony when she managed to get pizza delivery work. Swollen ankles. The constant fear that something would go wrong and she'd have no one to help her. She tried calling her mother twice. The first time, her mother answered but said nothing, just breathed on the line before hanging up. The second time, her father answered and told her never to call again. Susan gave birth to Lily on November 18th at County General Hospital. Alone except for a kind nurse named Rita who held her hand through the worst of the labor. Lily came into the world at 6:23 a.m., weighing 6 pounds and 4 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that announced her arrival to the entire maternity ward. The moment they placed Lily on Susan's chest, something changed. All the pain, all the rejection, all the fear, it didn't disappear, but it transformed into something else. Purpose. This tiny human needed her. This tiny human didn't care that Susan had been thrown away by everyone she loved. This tiny human thought Susan was the entire world. "I got you," Susan whispered to her newborn daughter, tears streaming down her face. "I promise, baby girl. I got you." The social worker who visited the next day tried to be gentle. "Ms. Henderson, you're going to need stable housing before we can discharge you with the baby. Do you have family who can help? A place to stay?" Susan had shaken her head, terrified they'd take Lily away. But Rita, the nurse, had scribbled something on a piece of paper, an address. "My sister runs a transitional home for mothers. Tell her I sent you. It's not much, but it's a start." That transitional home became Susan's lifeline for 8 months. A room shared with 2 other mothers, house rules, curfews, parenting classes. It was there that Susan learned she was stronger than she ever imagined. It was there she learned that family wasn't always blood. It was the people who showed up. Eventually, Susan saved enough from her pizza delivery job to rent a 1-bedroom apartment in a rough neighborhood. It had cockroaches and thin walls and a radiator that clanked all night, but it was theirs. She put Lily's crib in the bedroom and slept on a futon in the living room. 6 years later, that's still where they lived. The apartment had gotten slightly better. Susan had managed to get some furniture from a thrift store, but money was always tight. Always a calculation. Always a choice between this necessity and that one. But here's what Susan learned that her father's rigid faith had never taught her. Kindness costs nothing, and sometimes it's the only thing that saves you. The nurse who helped her, the social worker who bent the rules, the neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who babysat for free, the manager at Pizza Palace who gave her extra shifts when he could, random customers who tipped a little extra. These small mercies had kept Susan and Lily afloat. So when Susan saw that homeless man on the sidewalk, she didn't see a stranger or a statistic. She saw herself 6 years ago, desperate and invisible, praying someone would see her as human. She couldn't walk past him, even if it cost her everything. The pharmacy's fluorescent lights were too bright at 10:37 p.m., making Susan's exhaustion feel even heavier. She stood at the counter, her remaining $13.47 spread out in front of the pharmacist. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read, Denise. "I'm sorry, Ms. Mitchell," Denise said gently, her voice practiced in delivering disappointing news. "The full prescription is $32. With what you have here, I can give you a 3-day supply instead of the full 7 days. It'll help, but you'll need to come back for the rest." Susan nodded, her throat tight. 3 days. She'd have to figure out the rest by Friday. "That's fine. Thank you. Denise counted out 3 days' worth of the antibiotic, her movements efficient but sympathetic. She'd probably seen 100 Susans come through this pharmacy, mothers doing math in their heads, choosing between medicine and meals. You can pick up the rest any time within the next week. We'll hold it for you. Susan took the small bag, lighter than it should have been, and walked out into the cold night. In the car, she sat for a moment, staring at the partial prescription. Lily would be okay for 3 days. That's what mattered. Susan would figure out the rest. She always did. The apartment was quiet when she got home at 11:15 p.m. Mrs. Patterson was dozing in the armchair, one of her game shows playing softly on the television. The elderly woman woke when Susan entered, blinking behind her thick glasses. "How's my girl?" Susan whispered. "Sleeping like an angel. Ate all her nuggets. Well, except the 3 she saved for you." Mrs. Patterson stood slowly, gathering her knitting bag. She said her tummy hurt a little before bed, but I gave her some ginger ale and crackers like you said. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Patterson. I don't know what I'd do without you." The older woman patted Susan's hand, her palm soft and papery. "You're a good mother, Susan. Don't you ever doubt that. That little girl is lucky to have you." After Mrs. Patterson left, Susan checked on Lily. Her daughter was curled up in bed, her favorite stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin, her breathing soft and even. Susan placed her hand on Lily's forehead, warm but not burning. The fever was mild, manageable. She'd give her the antibiotic in the morning. Susan heated up the 3 chicken nuggets Lily had saved, ate them standing at the counter, and fell into bed at midnight, knowing her alarm would go off at 6 a.m. She never remembered her head hitting the pillow. The next morning came too fast. Lily's fever had broken during the night, and the little girl was bright-eyed at breakfast, chattering about a dream she'd had about puppies. Susan gave her the first dose of antibiotic, kissed her forehead, and dropped her at Mrs. Patterson's before heading to her morning shift. The Honda Civic made a sound it had never made before as Susan pulled out of the parking lot. A grinding, metallic screech that turned her stomach to ice. "No, no, no, please not now," Susan whispered, gripping the steering wheel. But the car jerked, shuddered, and the steering wheel locked up completely. She managed to coast into a gas station parking lot before the engine died with a final, defeated rattle. Susan sat there, hands still on the wheel, trying not to cry. She was supposed to start her shift in 20 minutes. She had 4 deliveries scheduled. Marco was counting on her. The tips from today were supposed to help cover the rest of Lily's medicine. She called Marco first. "My car broke down. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to figure out." "Susan, listen to me." Marco's voice was serious. "You're one of my best drivers, but I can't hold your shifts if you can't make it. I've got 3 other people who've called in sick this week. If you miss today, I'm going to have to give your Thursday and Friday shifts to someone else. I'm sorry, but that's just how it is. I understand. I'll figure it out. I'll be there." She hung up and called the closest mechanic, a place 2 blocks away. They sent a tow truck that cost her $8 of her remaining 13. The mechanic, a gruff man named Pete with oil-stained hands, didn't sugarcoat it. "Transmission's shot. I can fix it, but you're looking at $340 for parts and labor. Maybe $350. The number hit Susan like a physical blow. $340. She'd need to work for 2 weeks straight. Every shift, perfect tips, no emergencies, no unexpected expenses, to even get close to that number. "How long can I drive it like this?" "Lady, you can't drive it at all. It's dead. I can patch it temporarily, maybe get you another week, but that's still gonna run you $120 just for the patch job." Susan closed her eyes. "How soon can you do the patch?" 2 days. I gotta order the part. 2 days. 2 days without her car meant 2 days without work, which meant losing her Thursday and Friday shifts, which meant less money, which meant falling further behind. The spiral was familiar. One problem creates another until you're drowning. Okay, do the patch. I'll figure out the rest later. Susan took the bus home, a route that required 2 transfers and took 90 minutes instead of the 20-minute drive. She picked up Lily from Mrs. Patterson's, explained the situation, and the older woman's face creased with concern. "Susan, honey, I have some money saved." "No, Mrs. Patterson, you've already done so much. I'll figure this out." That night, Susan did the math over and over on the back of an envelope. Even with the bus, she could still make most of her shifts. She'd have to wake up 2 hours earlier. She'd have to bring Lily with her sometimes, let her do homework in the Pizza Palace break room. It wasn't ideal, but it was survivable. She'd survived worse. The next morning, Wednesday, Susan woke at 4 a.m. The bus schedule meant she had to leave by 5:30 to make her 8 a.m. shift. Lily was groggy and confused as Susan bundled her up in the darkness. "Mommy, why are we leaving so early? Our car is taking a little nap at the mechanic's shop, baby. So we're going on a bus adventure." "I like adventures," Lily said, even though her eyes were half closed. The bus was nearly empty at that hour, just Susan, Lily, and 3 other people who looked as exhausted as Susan felt. A man in a construction uniform, a woman in hospital scrubs, a teenage boy with a fast food restaurant logo on his jacket. All of them going to jobs that started before the sun came up, all of them trying to survive in a city that never stopped moving. Susan's shift was brutal. 12 deliveries, most to apartment buildings without elevators. Her feet ached. Her back screamed. But she smiled at every customer, made small talk, did everything she could to earn those tips. By the end of her shift, she'd made $31. Enough for the rest of Lily's medicine. She picked up the remaining 4 days of antibiotics on the way home, riding the bus with Lily sleeping against her shoulder. The little girl exhausted from a day spent in Mrs. Patterson's apartment while Susan worked. That night, after Lily was asleep, Susan sat at her kitchen table and looked at the bills. Rent was due in 12 days. She was short by $80. The car repair was due Friday, and she didn't have it. Her phone bill was overdue. The electricity company had sent a warning notice. For the first time in months, Susan felt the weight threaten to crush her completely. She could have used that $10. Could have used the money she spent on pizza for a stranger. That would have been an extra $23 in her pocket right now. $23 closer to solving her problems. But even as the thought crossed her mind, Susan knew she'd do it again. Because the alternative was becoming the kind of person who could walk past suffering and feel nothing. The kind of person who calculated the value of compassion against the cost of survival. She'd been that person once in her parents' house, where righteousness was measured in judgment and love came with conditions. She refused to become that person again. Susan pulled out the worn journal she kept in the kitchen drawer, the one where she wrote her prayers when speaking them out loud felt too heavy. She wrote 3 sentences. "I don't know how this works out. I don't know how we survive this month. But I'm grateful I was able to help someone who needed it more than me." She closed the journal and went to bed. Miles across the city, in a penthouse apartment overlooking the skyline, Brian Hartford sat in his home office, reading a file that had been compiled over the last 24 hours. Susan Mitchell, age 31, single mother, no criminal record, exemplary work history despite limited opportunities, estranged from family, living paycheck to paycheck, sometimes not even making it to the next paycheck. And despite all of that, she had given him pizza and $10. Brian had been testing humanity for 4 months on those streets. Hundreds of people had passed him. Exactly 7 had given him anything. Of those 7, 3 had been other homeless people sharing what little they had. 3 had been middle-class folks who dropped $1 or 2 without making eye contact. Susan was the only one who had sacrificed something she actually needed. The only one who had looked him in the eyes and seen a person. Brian picked up his phone and made a call. "Robert, I need you to do something for me. If you found yourself moved by Susan's unwavering kindness, even when it cost her dearly, consider subscribing to this channel. We share stories like these because they remind us what truly matters in this world. And if you've ever had to make an impossible choice between helping someone and helping yourself, drop your location in the comments and tell us about it. Your story might be the encouragement someone else needs today. But Susan's story was far from over. Because while she lay awake worrying about bills she couldn't pay, Brian Hartford was making decisions that would change everything. He just had to do it carefully. He had to do it right. Because Susan Mitchell wasn't a charity case. She was the rarest thing Brian had found in years. She was hope. Brian Hartford had built his first company at 23 with $1,500 and an idea that everyone said would fail. 22 years later, Hartwell Industries was worth $3.2 billion, employed over 8,000 people, and had revolutionized cloud-based security systems that protected everything from hospitals to government agencies. Forbes called him a visionary. Tech Weekly named him Innovator of the Decade. Wall Street analysts studied his every move like prophets reading signs. None of them knew that 3 years ago, Brian's entire world had collapsed in a hospital room. Her name was Caroline. They'd met at Stanford, married at 26, built the company together while most of their friends were still figuring out their careers. She was the steady hand to his creative chaos, the strategist to his dreamer, the person who saw through his ambitious exterior to the scared kid from Cleveland who was terrified of failing. They never had children. Caroline had endometriosis, and after years of trying, they'd made peace with it being just the two of them. They traveled. They worked. They built an empire. They were enough for each other. Then came the diagnosis. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe 8 if the treatment worked. It didn't work. Caroline died on a Tuesday morning in April, holding Brian's hand, telling him to promise her something. Don't stop living. Promise me you won't become one of those people who builds a mausoleum out of grief. Promise me you'll find something worth living for again. Brian had promised, even though he'd known it was a lie. For 2 years after Caroline's death, Brian went through the motions. He showed up to board meetings. He approved acquisitions. He gave interviews. But inside he was hollow. The penthouse apartment felt like a museum dedicated to a life that no longer existed. The company felt like an obligation rather than a passion. His therapist, Dr. Wendy Chun, had been direct in their session last November. Brian, you're not living. You're haunting your own life. You have all the resources in the world, but you've lost connection to what makes us human. And what's that? Brian had asked, his voice flat. Connection, purpose beyond profit. The understanding that we're all vulnerable, all mortal, all searching for meaning. You've insulated yourself so completely from struggle that you've forgotten what it means to need anything. That conversation had planted a seed. What if he stripped everything away? What if he removed the wealth, the name, the insulation, and just existed as a human being? Would anyone see him? Would anyone care? Or had Caroline been the only person who'd ever truly seen him, and now that she was gone, was he essentially invisible? The idea became an obsession. Brian spent 2 months planning what his assistant Robert called the experiment. He'd give up his identity, live on the streets for 6 months, and document how people treated someone who had nothing. No safety net. No resources, just a human being in need. Robert had argued against it. The board would have had him committed if they'd known. But Brian was the majority shareholder, and what he did with his personal time was his business, as long as the company kept running. He told everyone he was taking a sabbatical, traveling through Southeast Asia for spiritual renewal. The kind of thing wealthy people did when they had midlife crises. No one questioned it. Then Brian had walked away from everything. He'd spent 4 months on the streets in 3 different cities. He'd slept in shelters where men coughed through the night and the smell of unwashed bodies was suffocating. He'd stood on corners with cardboard signs, watching thousands of people pass without seeing him. He'd been spit on, cursed at, told to get a job, as if jobs were handed out like flyers on street corners. He'd also witnessed extraordinary kindness from people who had almost nothing. A homeless veteran who'd shared his sandwich. A street kid who'd warned him which alleys to avoid. An elderly woman who gave him her gloves because his hands looked cold. But the majority of people, especially those who clearly had resources, treated him like he was invisible. Or worse, like he was a stain they had to step around. Brian had been ready to end the experiment early, to conclude that humanity was exactly as selfish and disconnected as he'd feared, when he met Susan. He'd been outside Pizza Palace for 3 hours that night, watching the stream of customers, couples on dates, families picking up dinner, delivery drivers rushing in and out. He'd asked 17 people for help. 16 had ignored him completely. 1 had thrown a quarter at his feet without breaking stride. Then Susan had parked her beat-up Honda and just sat there, counting money in a way that told Brian she was counting every single dollar because every single dollar mattered. He'd watched her take a phone call, seen her face soften when she talked to whoever was on the other end. He'd seen her look at him, then look away, then look back. He'd recognized the internal struggle because he'd seen it on a dozen other faces that night. But Susan was the only one who'd gotten out of her car. The only one who'd looked him in the eyes like he was a person. The only one who'd given him warm food and asked his name. Brian had been so shocked that he'd almost broken character. Almost told her the truth right there. But he'd needed to see what she'd do. Needed to understand who she was. When she'd driven away, Brian had made the call to Robert. The experiment was over. He'd found what he was looking for. Not a person who gave from their abundance. A person who gave from their need. Over the next 24 hours, Robert compiled a file on Susan Mitchell. Everything public record. Her employment history, her address, her daughter's school enrollment, the fact that she had no criminal record, no debt beyond normal living expenses, and a pattern of reliable work despite limited opportunities. What the file couldn't capture was what Brian had seen in her eyes. Exhaustion, yes. Struggle, absolutely. But also something unbreakable. A core of kindness that hadn't been destroyed by everything life had thrown at her. Brian had built billion-dollar companies. He'd negotiated with Fortune 500 CEOs. He'd been featured on magazine covers and interviewed by major news networks. None of that had prepared him for reading about Susan's life and feeling his heart crack open. She'd been rejected by everyone who should have protected her. She was raising a daughter alone while working a job that barely covered rent. She was one emergency away from complete disaster, and she'd still helped him. Brian sat in his office, the city lights spreading out below him like a circuit board, and made a decision. He would help Susan, but he had to be careful. If she discovered who he was too soon, she'd think it was charity. She'd be embarrassed. She might refuse. No, this had to be done right, subtly, in a way that gave her dignity. He picked up his phone and called Robert again. "I need you to handle something for me." Quietly. "Of course, Mr. Hartford. What do you need?" "There's a mechanic shop on Morrison and Fifth. A woman named Susan Mitchell has a car being repaired there. A Honda Civic. I want that repair paid for in full anonymously. Tell the mechanic it's from a community assistance fund or something. Make sure Susan never knows it came from me. Consider it done. Anything else?" Brian looked at the file on his desk, at the photo of Susan that Robert had pulled from her employee ID. She wasn't smiling in the picture, but there was something in her eyes that reminded him of Caroline. Not the way she looked, but the quality of her spirit. Unbreakable. Find out everything you can about her situation, what she needs, what her daughter needs. But Robert, and this is important, I don't want to swoop in and solve everything. That would take away her dignity. I want to help her the way she helped me, as a human being, not as a project. I understand, sir. May I ask, what exactly are you planning? Brian smiled for the first time in months. A real smile, not the corporate mask he wore for board meetings. I'm planning to prove that Caroline was right. There is still something worth living for. And maybe, if I'm very lucky and very patient, I'm planning to find out if a man can be valued for who he is rather than what he has. You're going to pursue a relationship with her. I'm going to try to earn a relationship with her. There's a difference. She doesn't need a benefactor. She needs someone who sees her the way she saw me, as a human being worthy of kindness. Robert was quiet for a moment. Sir, with all due respect, you're a billionaire. She's a pizza delivery driver with a child. The power imbalance is, well, it's significant. I know, which is why I have to do this carefully. I'm not going to deceive her about who I am forever, but I need her to know me as Brian first. Just Brian, the man she helped. Not Brian Hartford, the CEO. Not the money. Not the empire. Me. And if she finds out you've been helping her anonymously, then I'll deal with that when it happens. But for now, fix her car. Do it tomorrow. Let her think someone in the community is helping someone in need. Because that's exactly what's happening. I'm just returning the favor. After Robert hung up, Brian stood at the window, looking out at the city where Susan was probably lying awake, worrying about problems he could solve with a single phone call. But solving her problems wasn't the point. The point was understanding what Susan already knew, that humanity isn't measured in bank accounts or job titles or the size of your house. It's measured in the moments when you have nothing to gain and everything to lose, and you choose kindness anyway. Susan had taught him that in 30 seconds outside a pizza shop. Now he just had to figure out how to be worthy of the lesson. Caroline would have liked Susan, Brian thought. She would have told him to be honest, to not play games, to treat this woman with the respect she deserved. I'm trying, Caroline, he whispered to the empty office. I promise I'm trying. Somewhere across the city, Susan was writing her prayers in a journal, unaware that her prayers were about to be answered in ways she couldn't imagine. Not because of divine intervention, but because one act of kindness had set something in motion that neither she nor Brian could stop, even if they'd wanted to. Thursday morning came with unexpected news. Susan was buttoning Lily's coat, preparing for another early bus journey, when her phone rang. The mechanic, Pete, his voice gruff but somehow softer than their last conversation. Ms. Mitchell? Got some interesting news about your car. Susan's stomach tightened. Is it worse than you thought? Actually, no. Well, it's fixed. Completely fixed. Not the patch job, the whole transmission. New parts, everything. Susan froze, one of Lily's coat buttons halfway through its hole. I don't understand. I didn't authorize the full repair. I can't afford. That's the thing. It's paid for. In full. Some community assistance program came through, said they help working single parents with emergency vehicle repairs. I got the check yesterday afternoon, verified it with my bank this morning. It's legitimate. I never applied for any program. Lady, I don't know what to tell you. Maybe your boss put in a word? Maybe someone nominated you? All I know is your car is ready, runs like new, and you don't owe me a dime. You can pick it up anytime. After the call ended, Susan stood in her tiny living room, phone still pressed to her ear, trying to process what had just happened. $340. Just gone. Taken care of. By some program she'd never heard of. Mommy, why are you crying? Lily asked, her small hand tugging at Susan's sleeve. I'm not crying, baby. I'm grateful. Someone helped us, and I don't even know who. Susan picked up her car that afternoon, running her hands over the hood like it was the first time she'd seen it. Pete handed her the keys and a receipt marked "Paid in Full," with a stamp from something called the Metropolitan Community Relief Fund. She'd looked it up on her phone right there in the parking lot. The organization existed, helped low-income families with emergency expenses, but their website said they had a 6-month waiting list and required extensive application documentation. Susan hadn't applied. Someone had helped her, and she had no idea who. The next week, more strange blessings appeared. A grocery store gift card, $100, showed up in her mailbox with no return address. Just a small note card that said, "For Lily's birthday. Every child deserves to celebrate." Susan had stood at her mailbox, gift card in hand, looking up and down the hallway like the giver might still be there. Mrs. Patterson swore it wasn't her. Marco at Pizza Palace said he wished he could take credit but couldn't. Susan used $50 to buy Lily the dollhouse she'd been drawing pictures of for months. A modest one from a discount store, but Lily's face when she saw it made Susan's heart feel too big for her chest. The other 50 went toward groceries, real groceries, fresh fruit and vegetables instead of ramen and canned soup. 2 weeks after that, Susan received a call from Lily's school. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Principal Anderson. I wanted to let you know that an anonymous donor has paid for Lily's field trip to the Science Museum next month, including lunch and the planetarium show." "I'm sorry, what?" "The donation came through our general fund, earmarked specifically for students who might otherwise miss out on enrichment activities. Lily's teacher, Mrs. Roberts, submitted her name, and the funds were approved. I wanted to make sure you were comfortable with Lily attending." Susan had to sit down. Yes, of course. Thank you. Please thank whoever did this. I wish I could tell you who it was." The donor insisted on anonymity. That night, Susan knelt beside Lily's bed during their nightly prayers, and for the first time in years, her prayers weren't pleas for help. They were thank yous. Thank you to God, to the universe, to whoever was quietly making their life a little easier. What Susan didn't know was that Brian Hartford had spent the last 3 weeks becoming an expert on her life. Not in a creepy way. He wasn't following her or invading her privacy. Robert had simply gathered publicly available information, talked to people in Susan's community who knew her, and created a picture of a woman who gave everything and asked for nothing. Brian learned that Susan volunteered at a food bank on her 1 day off each month, that she'd helped Mrs. Patterson recover from a fall last year, bringing her groceries and checking on her daily for 3 weeks, that she'd covered shifts for other drivers at Pizza Palace when they had family emergencies, even though she desperately needed the hours herself. Everyone who knew Susan Mitchell had a story about her kindness. Brian also learned about the upcoming rent increase that would price Susan out of her apartment in 3 months, about Lily's upcoming birthday, about Susan's dream of eventually going to community college to become a nurse, a dream she'd mentioned once to Marco and then never spoke of again because dreams felt like luxuries she couldn't afford. Each piece of information felt like a puzzle piece, and Brian was determined to help without overwhelming her, without making her feel like charity. He was also determined to meet her again, but as himself, or at least as a version of himself that didn't include the corporate empire and billion-dollar net worth. Brian had started going to the park near Susan's apartment on Sunday afternoons. Not following her, just being in the neighborhood. He'd adopted a rescue dog, a golden retriever mix named Charlie, partly because Caroline had always wanted a dog and partly because dogs were good conversation starters. He'd seen Susan there twice, playing with Lily on the playground, but he'd kept his distance. The timing wasn't right. He needed to figure out how to reintroduce himself without it seeming orchestrated. The opportunity came on a Sunday in early December. Brian was at the park with Charlie, throwing a tennis ball, when Lily came running over, her eyes wide with delight. "Mommy, Mommy, look at the puppy." Brian turned wide with delight. "Mommy, Mommy, look at the puppy." Brian turned and there was Susan, walking toward her daughter with that tired but genuine smile he remembered. She was wearing jeans and an old coat, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking nothing like the polished women Brian usually encountered in his corporate world. She looked real. She looked beautiful. "Lily, honey, you have to ask before you pet someone's dog," Susan called out, slightly out of breath from chasing her energetic daughter. "It's okay," Brian said, his heart pounding. "Charlie loves kids. You can pet him if you want." Lily dropped to her knees, and Charlie immediately started licking her face, his tail wagging so hard his entire back half wiggled. Lily's laughter was pure joy. Susan reached them, putting a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "I'm sorry, she's obsessed with dogs. We can't have one in our apartment, so she tries to adopt every dog she sees. Really, it's fine. He needs the attention. I just adopted him a few weeks ago, still getting used to having a companion." Susan looked at Brian then, really looked at him, and he saw the moment of recognition in her eyes. Her smile faltered, confusion crossing her face. Do I know you from somewhere?" This was it. The moment Brian had been both anticipating and dreading. "Actually, yes. We met a few weeks ago. I was in a rough place, outside Pizza Palace. You gave me pizza and more kindness than I deserved." Susan's hand went to her mouth. "Oh my God, you look so different. I almost didn't. Are you okay? Did you find the shelter I told you about?" The concern in her voice, immediate and genuine, made Brian's throat tight. "I'm much better now. Thanks to you, actually. That night, what you did, it reminded me that I was still human, that I still mattered. You have no idea how much I needed that. I'm just glad you're okay." Susan's eyes were glistening. You look healthy. That's wonderful." Lily was oblivious to the adult conversation, too busy being covered in dog kisses. "I've wanted to thank you properly," Brian said carefully. I know this might sound strange, but would you let me buy you coffee sometime? Just to say thank you. No pressure, I'd like to talk to you. Get to know the person who saved me that night." Susan hesitated, and Brian could see the war in her expression. Caution, hope, uncertainty. "I don't even know your name," she said finally. Brian Hartford. Well, Brian Hartford Jr., actually, but everyone just calls me Brian." He didn't mention the company, didn't mention the money, just gave her his first name and hoped it was enough. "Susan Mitchell. And this is my daughter, Lily. It's nice to officially meet you both." Stories like Susan and Brian's remind us that our smallest acts can create the biggest changes. And if you're finding hope in their journey, consider subscribing so you never miss the moments that restore your faith in unexpected connections. But let us know in the comments. Have you ever had a chance encounter that changed your life? Drop your location and share your story with our community. Susan looked at her daughter, then back at Brian. "Coffee sounds nice, but just so you know, I don't have a lot of free time. I work most days, and when I'm not working, I'm with Lily. I understand. Whatever works for you. Here, let me give you my number. and you can text me when you have time. No pressure. No expectations. Just two people having coffee. They exchanged numbers, and Brian watched as Susan gathered Lily, said goodbye to Charlie, and walked back across the park. She looked back once, a small smile on her face, before disappearing around the corner. Brian sat on the park bench, Charlie's head in his lap, and felt something he hadn't felt since Caroline died. Hope. Real, genuine hope. He wasn't naive. He knew the road ahead was complicated. He knew he'd have to tell Susan the truth eventually. About who he was, about the anonymous help, about everything. He knew there was a very real chance she'd feel deceived or manipulated. But for now, in this moment, he was just Brian. A man who'd been lost and found his way because of a woman's kindness. A man who wanted to know her better. A man who was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, life after loss was possible. Caroline had made him promise not to build a mausoleum out of grief. For the first time in 3 years, Brian felt like he was keeping that promise. 3 months passed like pages turning in a book Susan never expected to read. Brian had been patient, almost impossibly so. Their first coffee date had turned into 2 hours of conversation that felt like 20 minutes. He'd asked about Lily, about Susan's work, about her dreams. He'd listened in a way that made Susan feel like every word she spoke mattered. He'd been vague about his own life, saying he'd worked in technology but had recently stepped back to reevaluate his priorities. Not a lie, Susan would later realize, but not the whole truth either. They'd seen each other 6 times over those 3 months. Always casual. Coffee shops. The park with Lily and Charlie. Once, a simple dinner at a family restaurant where Lily had talked nonstop about her science museum field trip. Brian had been wonderful with Lily, patient when she asked a million questions, interested in her drawings, never trying too hard or forcing a connection. He'd let Lily come to him, and she had, gradually, until she'd asked Susan one night if Brian could be her friend too. Susan had been careful with her heart. She'd been burned before, abandoned before, and she had Lily to protect. But Brian made it easy to trust him. He showed up when he said he would. He remembered small details. He never pushed for more than Susan was ready to give. He also never mentioned money, never flashed wealth, never made Susan feel less than. He drove a modest sedan. He wore regular clothes. He split checks with her even when she protested. Susan was falling in love, and it terrified her. The call came on a Tuesday evening in March. Brian's voice was different, nervous in a way she'd never heard. "Susan, I need to talk to you about something. It's important. Can you meet me tomorrow? Mrs. Patterson can watch Lily. I already asked her. She said yes. Please, I need to be honest with you about something." Susan's stomach dropped. Here it was, the catch. The revelation that he was married or moving away or had been lying about something fundamental. She'd known it was too good to be true. "Okay," she said quietly. "Where?" "My place. I'll send you the address. I'll cook dinner. I promise, Susan, this isn't bad. It's just, I need you to understand who I really am." The address Brian sent was in a part of the city Susan had only driven through, never stopped in. The kind of neighborhood where doormen stood outside buildings with marble lobbies and restaurants had prices without dollar signs on the menu. Susan almost turned around 3 times. But she'd come to care about Brian, genuinely care, and she owed him the chance to explain whatever he needed to explain. The building's doorman greeted her by name. "Ms. Mitchell, Mr. Hartford is expecting you. Penthouse level." Penthouse. The elevator was lined with mirrors and smelled like expensive cologne. Susan caught her reflection. Her simple dress from a thrift store, her worn coat, her hands that always smelled faintly of pizza no matter how many times she washed them. What was she doing here? The elevator opened directly into an apartment that wasn't an apartment. It was a space from a magazine, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city, furniture that probably cost more than Susan made in a year, art on the walls that looked important. Brian stood in the kitchen area, wearing an apron over casual clothes, looking nervous and somehow younger than she'd ever seen him. "Hi," he said softly. "Thank you for coming." "Brian, what is this?" Susan's voice was barely a whisper. "This is my home, my real home, and I need to tell you the truth about who I am. And I need you to know that I'm terrified you're going to hate me for not telling you sooner." Susan stood frozen by the elevator, her purse clutched against her chest like armor. Brian took a breath. "The CEO and founder of Hartwell Industries. The company is worth about $3 billion. I have money, Susan. A lot of money. More than anyone needs." The words hit Susan like physical blows. She actually took a step backward. "When you met me that night outside Pizza Palace, I was in the middle of what my assistant called an experiment. I'd been living on the streets for months, trying to understand humanity, trying to feel something again after my wife died. Hundreds of people passed me, ignored me, treated me like garbage. You were the only one who saw me as human, the only one who gave from your need instead of your excess. You lied to me," Susan whispered. "I omitted the truth, and I know that's just semantic justification. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Susan. But I needed you to know me as just Brian first. Not my bank account. Not my company. Me, the man you helped. The man who fell in love with your kindness, and then fell in love with you." Susan's legs felt weak. She moved to the window, looking out at the city spread below like she was floating above her own life. "The car repair," she said, her voice hollow. "The gift card. Lily's field trip. That was you. Yes. You've been, playing some kind of game? Testing me? Seeing how the poor single mother reacts to charity." "No. God, no, Susan. I was trying to help without overwhelming you, without making you feel like a project. I was trying to give back what you gave me, dignity and care." "You lied," Susan repeated, tears streaming down her face now. "Everyone lies. Everyone leaves. I thought you were different. I am different because of you." "Susan, please let me explain. I need to go." Susan moved back toward the elevator, jabbing the button repeatedly. "Susan, please, don't leave like this. I love you. I love Lily. This doesn't change who I am, who we are together." The elevator doors opened. Susan stepped inside, finally looking at Brian fully. He looked devastated, reaching out like he wanted to stop her, but knew he couldn't. "You should have told me," Susan said, her voice breaking. "You should have been honest from the beginning. I don't care about your money. I never would have cared. But I care about honesty. My whole life, people have lied to me, used me, thrown me away. I thought you were different. I thought you saw me. I do see you. That's why." The elevator doors closed on his words. Susan rode down 47 floors, watching the numbers descend, each one feeling like a year of hope collapsing. By the time she reached the lobby, she was sobbing so hard the doorman asked if she needed him to call someone. She shook her head and walked out into the March evening, into the cold, back toward her world where things made sense and people didn't pretend to be homeless when they owned penthouses. Brian stood at his window, watching Susan's figure disappear into the city streets below, and felt his heart shatter in a way it hadn't even when Caroline died. Because Caroline's death wasn't his fault, but losing Susan was. 2 weeks of silence felt like 2 years. Brian called 17 times. Susan didn't answer. He texted, carefully worded messages that ranged from apologies to explanations to simple pleas just to talk. Susan read every one but couldn't bring herself to respond. She threw herself into work, picking up extra shifts, staying busy so she wouldn't have to think about the look on Brian's face when the elevator doors closed. So she wouldn't have to acknowledge the hollow space in her chest where hope used to live. Lily asked about Brian constantly. When is Brian coming to the park again? Can Charlie come visit? Mommy, why are you sad? Brian is busy, sweetheart. And Mommy's not sad. Mommy's just tired. But 5-year-olds know when their mothers are lying. Mrs. Patterson knew too. The elderly woman watched Susan with concerned eyes but said nothing, just hugged her extra tight when Susan dropped Lily off for babysitting. On the 15th day, something arrived at Susan's apartment. Not a delivery, not flowers or jewelry or any of the grand gestures a billionaire might make. Just an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a letter, handwritten on simple notebook paper, the kind you could buy at any drugstore. Dear Susan, I'm not going to apologize again. You've heard that enough. Instead, I want to tell you about Caroline. My wife died 3 years ago from cancer. We'd been together since college. She was my entire world. And when she left, I forgot how to be human. I forgot what mattered. I had everything money could buy and nothing that made life worth living. I went on to those streets looking for something, though I didn't know what. Maybe proof that humanity was as cold as I felt. Maybe permission to give up entirely. But then you saw me. You, who had every reason to be bitter and closed off, you chose kindness. You didn't save my life that night, Susan. You reminded me I had one. Everything after that, meeting you again, getting to know you and Lily, it was the first time in 3 years I felt alive. And yes, I should have told you the truth sooner. I should have trusted that you'd see me for who I am, not what I have. That was my mistake, and I own it. But I need you to understand something. I didn't help you because I pitied you. I helped you because you helped me, and because the world takes from people like you constantly. You give and give and give, and I wanted to give back. Not as a billionaire to a charity case, but as one human being to another. I love you. I love Lily. I love how you pray with her every night and teach her to be kind in a world that isn't always kind back. I love how you never complain even when you have every right to. I love how you see the best in people even after everyone you trusted betrayed you. I'm not asking you to forgive me right now. I'm asking you to let me prove that the man you got to know over coffee and park visits, that's who I really am. The money is just something I have. It's not who I am. If you never want to see me again, I'll respect that. But if there's any part of you that believes we had something real, please call me. Let me show you that I'm worth a second chance. Yours, Brian. P.S. Charlie misses Lily. He sits by the park entrance every Sunday like he's waiting for her. Susan read the letter 3 times, tears falling onto the paper, smudging the ink in places. She thought about her father, who'd thrown her out for making a mistake, about Marcus, who'd abandoned her when she needed him most, about all the people who'd looked at her circumstances and decided she wasn't worth their time. Brian hadn't done that. He'd seen her struggling and wanted to help. Yes, he'd withheld the truth about his identity, but he'd never lied about his feelings. He'd never made her feel small. He'd missed his laugh, missed the way he listened, missed watching him with Lily, missed feeling like maybe, just maybe, she deserved something good. That night, after Lily was asleep, Susan picked up her phone. Her fingers hovered over Brian's name in her contacts. She drafted a text 7 times, deleting each one. Finally, she wrote, "We need to talk. Really talk. No more secrets." The reply came within seconds. "Yes. Anything. When? Tomorrow. 2 p.m. That coffee shop on Maple Street where we had our first date. And Brian, come as yourself. All of yourself. I want the truth about everything. I'll be there. Thank you for this chance, Susan. I won't waste it. Susan set her phone down and took a deep breath. She was terrified. Terrified of being hurt again. Terrified of what it meant that a billionaire wanted to be with her. Terrified of Lily getting attached and then losing another person she loved. But she was also tired of being afraid. Tired of letting her past dictate her future. Tired of closing herself off from the possibility that maybe, just maybe, something good could happen to her. The next afternoon, Susan arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early. She'd changed outfits 4 times, finally settling on a simple dress and cardigan. Nothing fancy, just herself. If Brian wanted her, he needed to want the real her. The pizza delivery driver with a 5-year-old daughter and a 1-bedroom apartment. Brian arrived exactly at 2 p.m., not in a suit but in jeans and a sweater, looking as nervous as Susan felt. He carried a folder, which he set on the table between them. "What's that?" Susan asked. "Full transparency. Every anonymous donation I made. Every time I helped. The shelter foundation I started after meeting you that helps single mothers. My financial statements. Articles about my company. Everything. I'm not hiding anything anymore." Susan stared at the folder but didn't open it. Instead, she looked at Brian. Really looked at him, searching his face for deception or manipulation. She found only vulnerability. "Why me?" she asked softly. "You could have anyone. Someone from your world. Someone who understands that life. Why would you want someone like me?" Brian leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "Because everyone from my world sees Brian Hartford, the billionaire. They see the company or the money or what I can do for them. You saw a homeless man on a sidewalk and gave him your grocery money. You saw a human being who needed help. That's who you are, Susan. You see people, real people. And when you looked at me, for the first time in 3 years, I felt seen." "I'm scared," Susan admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I am too. I'm scared you'll never fully trust me again. I'm scared I'll mess this up. I'm scared that my world will overwhelm you or hurt you or change what we have. But I'm more scared of losing you without trying." Susan reached across the table, her hand hovering over his. "If we do this, if we really try, you have to promise me something. Anything. No more secrets. No matter how small. No matter if you think you're protecting me. I've been lied to enough in my life. I need honesty, even when it's hard." Brian took her hand, holding it like it was something precious. "I promise. Complete honesty. Starting now. I've already told my board about you. They're concerned about the optics of me dating someone outside our social circle. I told them I don't care what they think. I also told Robert, my assistant, that I want you to meet him because he's been helping coordinate everything, and I think you should know everyone involved in what I've been doing." Susan squeezed his hand. "I can't become someone I'm not. I'm not going to fit into country clubs or charity galas or whatever your world looks like. I'm a pizza delivery driver. I'm a single mom. That's who I am. That's who I fell in love with. I don't want you to change. I want to be part of your world, Susan. I want Sunday mornings at the park and dinner at family restaurants and helping Lily with her homework. I've had the penthouse and the fancy dinners and the high society events. They're empty. You and Lily, what you have, that's real. That's what I've been missing. This is going to be complicated. I know. People are going to judge. They're going to say terrible things about me, about why you're with me. Let them. I don't care what they say. Lily has to come first. Always. If this affects her negatively, if she gets hurt because of your world, that's where I draw the line. I would never let anything hurt Lily. She's Susan. She's already part of my heart. Both of you are." Susan felt the last of her walls beginning to crack. Not crumbling completely, not yet, but developing fractures that let light through. "Okay," she said finally. "We try. Slowly. Honestly. And if it doesn't work, I'll accept that. But I'm going to fight like hell to make sure it does." They sat in that coffee shop for 3 hours, Brian answering every question Susan had about his life, his company, his wealth, his intentions. He showed her the foundation he'd started, the one that had helped dozens of single mothers with emergency expenses, housing assistance, and childcare support. "You did this because of me?" Susan asked, looking at the foundation's mission statement. "I did this because of what you taught me, that kindness creates ripples, that helping one person can change everything. You changed me, Susan. This is me trying to change things for others." When they finally left the coffee shop, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Brian walked Susan to her car, and before she got in, he pulled her into a hug. Not a romantic embrace, just a hug. Simple, honest, full of promise. "Thank you for the second chance," he whispered into her hair. "Don't make me regret it," Susan whispered back, but she was smiling. 1 year later, on a November afternoon that felt impossibly warm for the season, Susan Mitchell stood in a small garden ceremony wearing a simple white dress that made her feel like she was floating. Lily was the flower girl, wearing a purple dress she'd picked out herself, scattering rose petals with the serious concentration of a 6-year-old given an important job. Charlie, the golden retriever who'd started it all, sat dutifully at the altar wearing a bow tie, his tail wagging every time Lily walked past. Mrs. Patterson sat in the front row, crying happy tears into a handkerchief. Marco from Pizza Palace was there, along with half the staff, all of them grinning like proud family members. Robert, Brian's assistant, sat next to them, no longer just an employee but a genuine friend who'd helped navigate the complicated merging of two very different worlds. And in the back row, hesitant but present, sat Susan's parents. The reconciliation had been Brian's idea, but Susan's choice. He'd found them through a private investigator, then asked Susan if she wanted him to reach out. She'd said no at first, the wounds still too fresh, the rejection still too raw. But then Lily had asked why she didn't have grandparents like other kids, and something shifted in Susan's heart. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a willingness to try. Her father had aged considerably, his rigid certainty softened by time and, as he tearfully admitted in their first conversation in 7 years, regret. Her mother had held Susan for 20 minutes straight, apologizing over and over for her silence, for choosing fear over love. They weren't fixed. Families broken that badly don't repair overnight. But they were here, and that was a start. Brian stood at the altar in a simple suit, not the expensive designer kind he wore for board meetings, just a regular suit that he'd wear, his eyes filled with tears, and Susan realized that this man, this billionaire who could have anything, was looking at her like she was everything. The ceremony was short, personal, officiated by the pastor from the community church Susan had started attending. Not her father's church, not the place that had judged her, but a place that had welcomed her and Lily with open arms. No questions asked, no conditions attached. When Brian slipped the ring on her finger, he whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." When Susan slipped a ring on his, she whispered back, "Thank you for being worth seeing." The reception was at a community center, not a fancy hotel ballroom. Pizza from Pizza Palace because, of course. Music from a local band that one of Susan's co-workers knew. Dancing and laughter and the kind of joy that money can't buy but kindness can create. As Susan and Brian swayed on the makeshift dance floor, Lily wedged herself between them, insisting on being part of the dance. Brian lifted her onto his hip, and the three of them moved together, a family formed not by blood or obligation, but by choice. I still work, you know, Susan said, her head on Brian's shoulder. 3 days a week now, but I still deliver pizzas. I know. That's one of the 1,000 things I love about you. You didn't let money change who you are. And the foundation? Growing. We've helped 47 single mothers this year. Emergency housing, vehicle repairs, childcare, job training. All because you showed me what one act of kindness could start. Susan pulled back to look at him. You know what the craziest part of all this is? What? That night when I gave you that pizza, I thought I was the one helping you. I had no idea you were about to save my life. Brian smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. We saved each other, Susan. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. Across the room, Mrs. Patterson was teaching Lily how to do a dance from her youth, both of them laughing. Susan's parents sat at a table, watching their granddaughter with expressions of wonder and loss, seeing all the years they'd missed, all the moments they'd chosen pride over love. Marco was talking to Robert about starting a program that would help Pizza Palace employees go to college. Plans were being made. Lives were being changed. Ripples spreading outward from one cold November night when a struggling mother decided that kindness mattered more than self-preservation. Later, as the reception wound down and guests started leaving, Brian found Susan standing outside, looking up at the stars. What are you thinking about? He asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. That night, the parking lot, $23.47. I almost drove away, you know. I almost convinced myself that I couldn't afford to help you. What made you stop? Susan leaned back into his embrace. My grandmother's voice. She used to say that kindness is never wasted, even when you can't see where it lands. I guess she was right. She'd be proud of you. I hope so. I hope she's watching. Wherever she is, seeing that the girl she raised is still in here somewhere, despite everything. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars, until Lily came running out, Charlie bounding beside her. Mommy, Brian. Mrs. Patterson says it's time to cut the cake. Susan took Brian's hand, then reached for Lily's, the three of them walking back into the light together, into the warmth, into a future that Susan had stopped believing in until a homeless man on a sidewalk reminded her that miracles still happen. Not because of divine intervention dropping blessings from the sky, but because humans choose kindness. Because a single mother with almost nothing decided that a stranger's hunger mattered more than her own security. Because sometimes, when you give away the little you have, the universe gives back more than you could ever imagine. Not always in the way you expect. Not always when you need it. But always when you've earned it through the simple act of seeing another person's humanity and choosing to honor it. 6 months after the wedding, Susan enrolled in community college to pursue her nursing degree. Brian scaled back his CEO duties to spend more time with his family. Lily started first grade, where she was known for being the kid who shared her lunch with anyone who needed it. The foundation they'd started together grew, helping hundreds of families climb out of desperation, all funded by Brian's wealth but guided by Susan's understanding of what struggling people actually need. And on cold November nights, when the wind picked up and the city felt harsh, Susan and Brian would sometimes drive to that corner outside Pizza Palace, where they'd met, where everything changed. They'd park the car, now a reliable new one but nothing ostentatious, and they'd watch people come and go, living their lives, fighting their battles, making their choices. And whenever they saw someone who looked lost or desperate or invisible, they'd get out of the car. They'd offer help. They'd see people, because that's what you do when you've been seen. You make sure others are seen too. Susan's story isn't about a poor woman being saved by a rich man. It's about two broken people who helped each other remember what it means to be human. It's about how the smallest act of kindness can redirect the course of multiple lives. It's about how wealth without compassion is poverty, and how compassion without resources is still the richest thing you can give. It's about a pizza, $10, and a moment of choice. That's all it took. That's all it ever takes. If Susan and Brian's journey has touched your heart, if their story reminded you that every encounter matters and every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about, then subscribe to this channel. We're building a community of people who believe kindness still matters in a world that often feels too hard. Drop your location in the comments below and tell us about a time someone's kindness changed your trajectory, or a time your kindness changed someone else's. Your story might be exactly what someone needs to hear today, because stories like these, they're not just entertainment. They're reminders that we're all connected, that we all matter, that every single one of us has the power to change a life with a simple choice to care. Susan learned that in a parking lot on a Tuesday night. Now you know it too. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge?